Question number 6, Metiria Turei.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, tēnā koutou te whare. My question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by his statement to Parliament yesterday that he's in government to make this country a better place for New Zealanders and their families?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why is his government's fiscal priority spending on tax cuts in an election year when it would only cost about $10 million a year to feed lunch to the thousands of kids who go to school hungry every day?
The
Speaker,
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The member is making assumptions about what the government may or may not do in its budget in 2017, but I make the point that this is the government that's actually ensured that all young New Zealanders that want to have a breakfast in school may get that, and literally I think 5 million of those have now been provided. Mr Speaker, this is the first government in 43 years to raise benefits, and that'll obviously be beginning on 1 April. This is a government that's currently spending $4.3 billion per year on benefits, $2.4 billion on working for families, and $1.9 billion on subsidising housing for low-income families. We certainly want a competitive tax rate and a competitive tax system because it might come as a shock to the member, but some people out there are very, very hard-working and just deserve to keep a little bit more of what they earn.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why has the Prime Minister prioritised spending on tax cuts in an election year when he could instead properly insulate another 200,000 cold, damp homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The member's making some assumptions about what may or may not be in Budget 2017. But I'd point out that this is a government that's insulated over 300,000 New Zealand homes. Very proud of that record.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When the cost of pollution from dairy farming to our rivers and lakes is expected to cost around $15 billion to clean up, shouldn't he prioritise the passing of tough new laws to stop this destruction rather than prioritising tax cuts for the very rich?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
This government's done a tremendous amount to actually improve water quality in New Zealand, including national standards and other measures that have been taken. And in fact, if the member wants to stay tuned, she'll be able to read the new discussion document that will be coming out on fresh water and seeing many of the policies and ideas that are being canvassed in that. And she'll probably enjoy reading that, and we will personally make sure the copy gets delivered to her office so she can read it.
Much appreciated, Prime Minister.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Does the Prime Minister agree with the IMF that taking steps to, quote, reduce the tax advantage of housing over other forms of investment, end quote, would help to fix the Auckland housing market and also help young families buy into their first home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, firstly, the government took steps last year in relation to tax, which were primarily aimed at the Auckland housing market, but in relation to the Bright Line test. Secondly, the government's indicated that there will be almost certainly a withholding tax applied to foreigners, which we are currently working on. Thirdly, it's my personal view that if you really wish to fix the issues in relation to house prices in Auckland, then that remains very much a supply issue, and that's why the government's focus of attention has been there. I think you're starting to see signs of that, working with record levels of consenting and building activity over the last 12 months compared to, say, the last 7 or 8 years. That is more likely to be the most effective form.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Well then, isn't it time that the Prime Minister considered a proper capital gains tax to help level the playing field between those who are lucky enough to own their own homes and those families who are still desperate for one, given that the IMF recommended reducing the tax advantage to housing?
The Right Honourable
Mr
Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
I don't support the Greens policy that's just obviously been announced by the member of putting a capital gains tax on the family home.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
How effective have capital gains taxes been at suppressing house prices in Vancouver, Sydney and London?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Highly ineffective. Mr Speaker, one of the things that you do see, though, in relation to places like Vancouver and Sydney and Melbourne and the likes has been that house prices have risen, but they've actually risen in part for the same reason in Auckland, because this is now a place and a country people want to come to. I remember when utopia for a lot of people was racing to the Auckland International Airport to get away from Helen Clark's government, but now they're rushing back to New Zealand.
Order. The question's been answered.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why is his government's priority tax cuts rather than saving for our future? And will he announce the resumption of contributions to the superannuation fund before spending on tax cuts for the wealthy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the member makes one correct point, which is this government has been more focused on savings probably than any other government because of its tight fiscal management and careful fiscal management. Debt is likely to be around about $100 billion less than it would have been. What the Green Party does is come to Parliament every single day and tell people they're going to be able to tax them more and spend more and believe that will have no impact on the indebtedness of New Zealand. Secondly, if the member really believes that the answer to all of these issues is to put money in the super funds and get some remarkable return, then what the member should do is go and borrow $500 billion, whack it into the stock market and see how she goes. She might do a little bit better than George Soros, but I suspect she probably won't.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given the IMF yesterday recommended new incentives for KiwiSaver to address our, quote, chronically low national savings, end quote, does he still stand by his statement that the removal of the $1,000 kickstart contribution will not make a blind bit of difference to the number of people who join KiwiSaver?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
In my opinion, yes, and it wouldn't make any difference to national savings because the government would actually be borrowing that $1,000 to give to someone to put in their savings account.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
What was the KiwiSaver enrolment rate this time last year and before he cut the $1,000 kickstart, and what is it now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I don't have those numbers with you. The member would need to either put it down in writing or direct that question to the Minister of Finance.
Oh. Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Does the Prime Minister genuinely think that spending on tax cuts is more important than hungry kids, polluted rivers and saving for our future?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Government spends in the order of $72, $73 billion a year, the bulk of which is actually spent on a range of different areas, obviously health and education, but a great deal actually on low income and people who are in need. But what is absolutely true is that when a country has a competitive tax rate, which actually encourages people to work, gives them the incentive to save and take on extra employment, and actually ensures that inflation doesn't eat away because of the bans that we have in our tax system from their income, that's a fair model and system. And actually our whole system relies on people getting out of work in the morning, working hard and paying taxes. And in my experience, there are literally millions of New Zealanders who get up every morning who don't want the government to give them a handout, but certainly just want to have a fair system under which to operate.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Can the Prime Minister please confirm that cutting taxes is a priority for this government? And if not, can he explain to the House the difference between not taxing money in the first place on the one hand and spending it on the other?
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr
Minister.
Speaker, the government has indicated that within the right fiscal parameters it would like to cut taxes for the reason that the member, I think, has pointed out in his question, which is because otherwise the burden of tax actually goes up over time on individuals because of fiscal drag if for no other reasons. And actually we want to make sure that we have a competitive tax system, and as we know, when we have broad-based low rate that's fairly applied, actually what you see is New Zealanders get on, they pay their tax bill, they don't spend time trying to avoid taxes. And what we know actually with the Green Party and, to be frank, with the Labor Party, is all they know how to do is spend other people's money, when the rest of the country is actually focused on how to make money.
Question number 7.